Yes, it says live. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Alexandra Schnoes. I apologize for our tardy and confusing start. We've had a little bit of an adventure with YouTube this morning. So I'm Alexandra Schnoes. I am the Associate Director of Career and Professional Development here at iBiology. And I'm one of the course directors for our Planning Your Scientific Journey. And this live Q&A that we're hosting today is about talking to your mentor about your research. So let me start with introducing our guests briefly. Our first guest, Janet Bradshaw, is an assistant professor of kinesiology and director of the Wisconsin Institute for Science Education and Community Engagement at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She also serves as the associate director of the NIH-funded Mentor Training Core of the National Research Mentoring Network and chairperson of the Leadership Committee for NSF's Research Experiences for Undergraduates, REU program in biology. Dr. Bradshaw has developed training curricula for research mentors called Entering Mentoring and mentees called Entering Research, and is leading a project to develop common assessment tools for use across NSF's Research Experience for Undergraduates program. Our next guest, Harland Jones, is an associate professor of molecular medicine and director of the Center for Diversity and International Programs at the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center, UNTHSC. Dr. Jones's research program is in neuroimmunology and health disparities, and he also directs the National Research Mentoring Network, NRMN, Professional Development Program, NRM Star at UNTHSC. Dr. Jones is additionally a certified master facilitator who provides training in best mentoring and professional development practices across the country. Our last but not least, certainly, is Jody Rosenblatt. She's the professor of oncological sciences, my apologies, at the University of Utah and investigator at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. Her lab studies how epithelia maintain constant cell numbers through cell death and cell division, and have uncovered the mechanical forces that control each process. And in 2016, she recorded several iBiology seminars on this work. And so I strongly recommend anyone go and check them out. They're fantastic. She's a dedicated and passionate mentor, having advised many undergraduates and graduate students and postdoctoral fellows over the years. So welcome, thank you to our esteemed guests for taking time out from their busy schedules to chat with us about this often fraught question of when you're a trainee, when you're a grad student or a postdoc, or maybe even an undergrad, how to talk to your mentor about their research. I would especially like to welcome our our Q&A audience. Some of you are likely part of our iBiology Planning Your Scientific Journey course. In the course right now, students are building research plans and scheduling meetings with their mentors to discuss these plans. And so our goal here is to support these students in the course and all science trainees. We want them to have a productive conversation with their mentor about their research plan and the results of the research itself. So your research plan, of course, will depend on where you are in the process of developing the research project and may include some combination of the following. Building your research questions and or setting experiments, or what experiments you're thinking of or pursuing, your analysis of the merits and pitfalls of your proposed current research project, and or your short and long-term goals to help you move the project along. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions for Janet, Jody, and Harlan, and then I will ask for questions from the audience. Also, many of the questions that I already have on my list are coming from questions that have come up in our course. So most of what I'm asking are direct questions that students have asked. And as we get started, I want to sort of start with the basics. We've heard from some of our course participants and other trainees that we've worked with, having also been trainees ourselves, that they feel reluctant to talk to their mentors about their research or research plans for a number of different reasons, which we'll go over today. And I'd like for us to address those head on in our Q&A. So my first question is, why would you even talk to your mentor about your research plan? Why is discussing the big picture ideas, the analysis or goals for your project important? And I'd like to start with Jody for this question. So if you don't mind, why is this important?
Well, so it's really important, I think, just to framework where you're going to go. Some people, I think they hate writing grants. Okay. When you start, you just hate writing grants. And then later on, you realize you really like writing grants because it's the only time you can carve out to actually think about your research. And the people who don't carve out that time and think about the research in kind of in a more, structured way, they don't get as far. So I think it really helps to do that. And I would say it's good to do this. You have the thesis meetings if you're a student, but each week it's good. I think I used to do this with my mentor, is just meet each week and talk about what I did the previous week, what I'm planning to do the next week. And through that, you often don't even need the feedback of the mentor in the end, because you've already sort of processed it in a more thorough, way. So it's better if you go into those meetings with an agenda. And so the people that I have better meetings with come in with their own agenda and steer it the direction they want to.
Harland or Jody, would you like, Harland or Janet, would you like to add anything, any other related thoughts to that?
This is Janet. Hi. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. So I want to echo what Jody just said. I totally agree with all of it. If for no other reason than to talk to your mentor on a regular basis, this person has expertise in what it is that you're trying to learn how to do. So why would you not want to take advantage of that person's knowledge and experience to help you? I think the notion that just checking in and trying to contextualize a week's worth of work into a broader vision will help you keep yourself on track. So even though meeting with your mentor might feel like he or she is keeping you on track, I think you'll keep yourself on track if you do this on a regular basis. So I think it's well worth the time and energy.
Thank you. So true.
Yeah, this is Harland. I'd like to, again, just bring to light a couple of points related to that. I think many of the times, maybe mentees as yourself may be a little reluctant or nervous at sometimes to pick the opportunities to talk about your research plan. I think obviously, what I'm hearing here, and I agree, it should be on a regular basis, but, the tones can be, or the strategies can be very different. Obviously, some should be very formalized in terms of providing some structure to your meeting with your mentor related to the plan. This means you may come into the meeting with a notes or a framework or even a timeline on what you're discussing. Many of us, though, at maybe earlier stages in the research planning phase, might use a more less formal interaction. And I think that's always good to develop the relationship and build that relationship with your mentor as you learn the directions of your research that is aligned with his or her goals as a research investigator. And so I think there's a number of strategies, and you just have to decide, when and at what time it's best to implement different informal versus formal settings and I guess outlines in which you present your work to your mentor in the form of a plan.
All really good points. And
can I add
more
to that too? I mean, I don't want to take over all your questions, but I feel like it's important. For me, this was interesting, this whole topic, because I didn't know that my mentees didn't want to talk to me. So I think a lot of times maybe the mentors don't know that this can be an intimidating experience. And so one thing I would underscore, I've had this happen to me, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is really good. I'm glad you brought this up. People can get really far off track and just forget kind of what the main point of what they're working on is. And that is okay. You can come to your mentor. You should be able to come to your mentor. Maybe this is with really stupid questions a lot, it is. Because through that, you'll understand what you do know, what you don't know, and where you're going better. But also just this time of just having relaxed time to talk about the conversation could take the whole project in a different direction if you're just loosely talking about things. And if you bring up, I don't really know why I'm doing this, you might see the mentor going like, what was it we were doing? And it could lead to further questions. So I think if there is a feeling of intimidation, that should not be there. I think you'll be surprised. I think you will surprise a lot of your mentors by saying that, because I think a lot of people don't realize that this is intimidating or worrying.
Yeah, I think it's often something that trainees, it's not an open conversation. You know, they want to do well for their mentors, and they you know, it's hard to be honest about maybe how tentative or confused or a trainee might be about having that conversation. So I think that's a really good point, is pointing out that as a mentor, it may not be at all clear to the mentor that this is actually a slightly difficult conversation. So, and in fact, they're not looking at it as a difficult conversation. They're actually looking forward to it, very likely. Which actually brings up something each of you sort of brought up, which I'd like to touch on. It really sounds like the ideal situation of talking to your mentor or your mentors about your research should happen frequently. So is there an ideal of how often you should talk to your mentor, or how often should that happen? Harlan, maybe I'll start with you. So
yeah, I think it really actually is an alignment between you and your mentor. You know, from my experiences, we hold regular laboratory meetings, so that's the place to really present your findings, if you will, at a certain time point to the investigator or to the lab. But then again, when you think about research planning, you know, there's in terms of my experience, the fruitful conversations come beyond the meeting and outside of the meetings, where you do have that one-on-one contact with one of your mentees on their research and on their research plan. Because, you know, the plan is really a long-term endeavor related to some of the short-term ins and outs of getting findings from one particular experiment to the next. And so, you know, I think it's just a case of what type of relationship you establish with your mentor in terms of that interaction.
Other comments from?
I'll just add. I mean, I think as a beginning, I'm just putting some framework, because it does vary a lot, and if you have more senior people, they may not want to meet as often. But when graduate students are starting in my lab or postdocs, I usually like to meet with them once a week individually. So we do have group meetings, but I think that once a week is a good time. And some people say, oh, I don't have anything to talk about, so let's don't meet. And actually, that's the time where you do need to talk more. I think there's a feeling like, oh, I don't have anything to talk about, I can't meet with them, and you put it off. But usually there's something that's very simple that's in the way. And I think the more you build up this, oh, I can't talk because I don't have anything to go on, it just makes it worse. And that's it. The times where you need to give group meetings are the times where you don't have results, because you need to figure out why you're not getting the results, right?
That's such a
teamwork, and how people can build the whole thing, the whole project forward.
I think unfortunately we lost a little bit, or I lost a little bit of you, Jody, but I think that's such an important point. Actually, Janet or Harlan, do you also feel similarly? Because that's sort of a feeling I have, that even when it feels like there's nothing to talk about, you should be talking to your mentor.
Yeah. And I agree with, you know, it varies how frequently you should meet depending on how seasoned the trainee is, right? So new folks I meet with regularly, and this is not just with trainees, but employees as well. As people are getting off the ground and figuring out what they're doing, I think it's important to have a lot of communication early on. If for no other reason, even if maybe you aren't getting a lot of results, but you're getting to know one another and you're getting to learn how to function well together in a meeting. I think I'd add one other thing is that sometimes schedules are crazy. And if you can't actually meet, not because you don't have anything to talk about, I also keep running dialogues in like a box note or a Google Doc or something with each person who is on my team so that we can communicate with each other even when we're not sitting in the same room. So even if we can't meet at a scheduled time, we usually update each other on what's going on and figure out if there's anything in the way, what we can do electronically. So that's actually been very helpful to have the tools like that, or to use tools like that. It also allows us to go back and look at, well, now what did we talk about last week and what were the big things we wanted to do, right? So we can make little action items or to-dos to help keep us on track in our discussions. So I think that if we don't meet every week, we at least update that on a weekly basis.
That's such a great use of sort of ever-present technology that sort of most people hopefully have access to. Harland, do you also feel like even when there's nothing to talk about, when there feels like there's nothing to talk about, there should be a conversation?
No, certainly. That is the warning signs of a lack of communication. And I think Jody's hit the nail on the head. Is you need much conversation, particularly for early stage trainees, is let them know that you're thinking about what they're thinking in terms of their research plan. And as we go, we'll see the nuances emerge in terms of why we're not communicating on a regular basis, or what type of opportunities there are to get engaged or make sure that the trainee is engaged with you and comfortable with you in sharing their research experience in the lab day to day and month to month. So I think that's very important. And I like the idea about the technology piece and you making sure there's, kids are so, I wouldn't say less personal, but you have this technology available to you. So we should make use of it as well and connect via email, connect to different opportunities in a written form. And it provides a nice way to make sure at the next visit or the next communication that we've touched upon the points that we brought forth before. So it's great tools to use.
Really good point. So now we're going to start getting a little deeper, really sort of a number of students of our course. And of course, we've heard from other trainees that we've interacted, sort of have these specific questions that sort of really reflect their own experiences, but in some ways they're general. Like these are all things we've heard before. So I'll start with a number of trainees have sort of different reasons for like, I'm uncomfortable to have this conversation because. So one of the things that's come up is sometimes trainees don't want to talk about their research because they actually feel, or it seems to them, that their mentor is too busy or uninterested in actually having this conversation in the first place. And in fact, the mentor would prefer not to have this conversation. So I'm wondering what you might say to that grad student or postdoc who is feeling that way. Janet, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I think that I was surprised when I saw that comment because I feel like your mentor actually really wants to know what's going on. You may perceive that they don't want to know, but I think that they really do. And it might just be the way you're phrasing the ask to have a meeting. And it could be that what you want to propose to them is that you can get together so that you can share what you've accomplished so far and that you need their help or expertise. You've experienced a couple of hurdles or something and you want to talk about that. So if you're in a position where you haven't been having regular meetings with folks and out of the blue, you decide, you're going to ask your mentor to have a meeting, they're probably going to wonder, oh, something really big must be happening. And in fact, you really just want to check in. So if you're just a little more explicit about what you hope to accomplish in the meeting, I think that'll probably open the door, because I can almost guarantee they're going to want to accomplish the same things that you want to accomplish. And it'll also convey to them that you've thought ahead of time and you're not just coming to chat, but you actually have, an agenda. And it's going to be a productive time well spent. So I think I would have some faith. I bet they're going to be interested in what it is that you want to talk to them about, even if on the outside it might look or feel like they're not that interested. But they wouldn't have invited you to work on their research team if they weren't interested in the project that you're working on. So I would say have faith and make the ask.
That's so good. Jody, do you have anything that as an active mentor now, and I'm sure very busy mentor, what would you say to a trainee who's feeling that way? Uh-oh, do we have Jody?
I think she's frozen. Oh,
Sorry, are you trying to break it up?
I'm sorry, Jody. Yes. I don't know if you can hear us right now. The internet, I know Jody is joining us from
Can you hear
Europe.
me?
So, yes, so we can hear you now. So
Okay.
the question was, I don't know if you heard, we were discussing a little bit about how to deal with situations where a trainee might feel that their mentor is too busy or uninterested, that they just rather actually not have a conversation about the research. They have so many other things to do that they'd prefer to be doing those other things instead. And I know you're an accomplished and very busy mentor, so I was curious how you would respond to that trainee sort of feeling that way.
Yeah, so I would agree with Janet. Please give your mentor a chance, please, because for me, there are a lot of things that I do in a day that I don't really care to do. But if he says, "Can I talk to you about my research?" I will stop everything I'm doing and talk. That's the only thing I live for. I love it. This is the best thing. So if you don't have that, and because maybe it is true. I'm not going to assume. Maybe it is true that you don't have that with you have that many else, but you are not getting along with your mentor. That's another situation. Then you need to, I would give them a few chances, but if it's not working, sometimes those mentor-mentee relationships don't work just for weird personality mismatches. And it is kind of like, it's a relationship. So sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. And so you could switch. You can also, it takes a village to run, to raise a child, and it takes a village to grow a graduate student. So I often got help from lots of different people when I was both a postdoc and a student. So some things your mentor is really good at technically, and sometimes they're not. I haven't cloned for a long time, for instance, so I'm not very good at that. Then I tell them to go talk to somebody else. I think that most people, this is what we're in it for. This is what we train to do. So usually we're into it. But if you get people who are kind of like moving off and not on track, maybe you can think about switching. It's not that I did it. I switched when I was a postdoc, and it is not the worst thing in the world to do. It can be really productive. So it's all.
Thank you. That's really powerful to hear that, making big changes can sometimes really, really accomplish something good. Not that that's necessarily always the answer, but that can be a positive answer if need be for particular cases and particular people. Any other comments or thoughts about sort of the issue of feeling like your advisor or your mentor just sort of isn't really interested and doesn't want to talk about it? Yeah, Janet.
So Jody reminded me that, in fact, there was a postdoc in my lab when I was a graduate student who, in the end, I feel like saved me a little bit. When I felt like my mentor wasn't as interested in my work as he had been at the beginning, I think he was, but that was my perception. And finding another person on the team who knew more than I did and could help me and served as kind of like a second mentor. So at that stage, I think it would have been really hard for me to leave the lab because I was far along in my thesis work. But I just needed a little extra attention to get over some humps. And, I looked around and there were other people on the research team who understood my project well enough and could provide some added support. And so, I would say multiple mentors wherever you can find them and for whatever kind of needs you have are a great thing. It's really hard to find one person who's going to meet all your needs. So I would say don't be scared to look left and look right and see if there are others around who can help you.
Thank you. That's really important. In fact, actually, we have a question from the chat box that I think sort of leads into this very effectively. Sort of the more challenging side of mentor-mentee relationships, when in fact maybe you feel like, or maybe in fact it is, that your mentor isn't that supportive, or maybe they've sort of lost interest in your project and maybe isn't that interested in helping. What can one do in that situation? And maybe we'll start with you, Harland.
Well, that's a hard one. I think, there are going to be times and experiences where, maybe because of the individual quirks or just being an individual, that the mentor and the mentee are not on the same page. And you have to confront that. And I think that you have to be very honest with yourself. How do you arrive at that conclusion? I would think would be beneficial by having other teammates with you, other students, fellow postdocs that may be in the lab, that you can, get some context behind maybe why you may be feeling that way related to how the major investigator is responding or not responding to your work. And so, but it is a conversation that must be had at some point if you believe that, there's disinterest of your project by your mentor. Obviously, as a mentor, we got to be interested in all aspects of the data, whether we think it's going in the right direction or not, because many times what we believe is in the right direction or not going in the right direction happens to be a very interesting question that we want to address in any way. But there's other issues that may relate to that, and that might be just aligning expectations of what the mentor is expected of you and then what the mentee is actually thinking that they're on the same page with. So very difficult topic, but one thing you have to really get to is I have to address this, with the mentor if you want to make sure your career is headed in the way you want it to go. So very, very very serious question.
Any other thoughts that anyone might have on this topic? Janet.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's coming up for me right now is these can be very tough because you also don't want to burn any bridges while you're navigating this difficult situation, right? So like it or not, your mentor is probably going to be asked for recommendations for you throughout at least your early career. And I think it's important to really nurture the relationship with that person in a way that's open and honest and respectful. And so, as I reflect back on asking the postdoc in my lab when I was a graduate student for help, it wasn't without my thesis mentor's knowledge that this was happening or anything. I mean, we were talking about things together. And I think that, I don't know that I was aware of what the consequences might have been if I hadn't kept things open. I fortunately just did. But I think that you have to be mindful of where you want to go and how you want to get there. And I think you have to be, the other thing I'll add is, especially for graduate students, you have a thesis committee, right? And that whole group of folks is supposed to be there to support you and help you. And sometimes that help is in navigating the relationship with your mentor. So this is another group of people that I think can really make a difference. If you don't know, if you're having a tough time with your mentor and you don't know what to do, these are 4 or 5 other people who probably know your mentor relatively well and know that his or her research. So I would also offer that it's worth asking for their advice, because they know this person and they may have some really insightful ways to share with you that you could be working with them more effectively. So.
That makes those are all really good points. And what I'm really hearing from everybody is this really important theme of trying to have multiple mentors and reaching out when you need help, and realizing that there are structures, especially if you're a grad student, but maybe if you're a postdoc, to help you get the people are available to help you, even though it may not seem totally obvious at the beginning. Just want to recognize that Jody has dropped off, which I think might be an internet problem. Hopefully she will come back, but if not, it's been great to have her so far with us. I'll move on to another question that's actually come up from our course students. And I've certainly, when I was a grad student, I think I heard this too, which was, what do you do when your mentor is really excited about sort of talking about the individual experiments, but doesn't really want to have sort of the big picture conversation, sort of where everything is going, but really just wants to talk about sort of the nitty gritty? And maybe I'll start with you, Harlan, on that question.
Sure, great. Very good question. I think a lot of times, mentors such as myself sometimes gets very excited about the experiment and where they're headed toward, perhaps for the sake of writing a publication, if we use that as an example, or even a grant. And so there needs to be some unique strategies, I think, for the mentee to understand how to, have the mentor back up a bit and think about the mentor. Or you. And so, yeah, I think one strategy is always to think about, and we kind of touched upon this very early, is communicating during the regular discussions in the meetings, always finding opportunities to create a framework of where the specifics about your research translates into your career goal. And does the mentor understand that this is, and recognize this? I'm sure they do, but just reiterating how important these little steps mean to meeting some of the milestones towards your career. And a great technique would be able to, when you get an opportunity, is lay down that really fluid timeline and progress about, after so many experiments, do we have a story here to tell that may be framed into a manuscript? Or ask the question to the mentor, how is this going toward your specific aims on your grant? And so unique questions that you can address will kind of, typically for me, gets me back into the framework of thinking about the student's program, offering conversations about the progress of the student, of the student's productivity in the coursework or advanced coursework or defense qualifying exams and such, and how they relate to the research. So I think if I was a student, that would be the strategies that I would use to make sure you're touching base with the specifics of your research, but making sure that a mentor such as myself understands that you're thinking about some things very important to you, and that's related to the long-term vision of the career and the stages it's going to take, such as a paper being written, a grant, a training grant being able to apply for, and things of that nature.
Oh, really good points. Jody, welcome back. Hopefully you can hear me. The question that we were talking about is what do you do when you're a grad student or a postdoc and your advisor is really excited about the individual experiments, but maybe not so interested in talking about the big picture. And so how do you navigate those conversations so that you can get both the individual pieces of, talking about the experiments and sort of building the broader picture of your overall project. So if you can hear me, I was wondering your comments on that.
Okay, sorry. I guess I just clicked off entirely. I had to get on through my phone, which is also unstable. So we'll see how this goes. So I think it was kind of cutting out a little bit. So I think that I'm just going to recap the question is, how do you carry a conversation when you're trying to talk about, fine details and the big bones of the picture? Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, so I think this is one of those things that I was talking about, that sometimes people lose track of what the big picture project is, and that seems really embarrassing. And then sometimes maybe the PI does this too. So they can just get into, cloning problem, and they just keep working on this cloning thing, and then they lose the picture and they kind of lose interest in their project. I think that can happen. So I think it's good to keep wrapping back into the bigger picture and keep making sure that student track. I think as the student or postdoc, it's also important that they know where that is going as well. And so that they can kind of keep bringing this in, because I think there was the question that we were talking about before is like, if people are losing interest. Now, why might that be? I mean, if people are losing a lot of interest, it might be that they've lost the big picture project. And if you're just getting into a cloning, clone after clone or something like this, it sounds like I don't like cloning. I don't understand cloning, but I mean, you can get into a track where you just keep doing the same experiment over and over again, and you kind of lose the bigger picture. And that's what you want to avoid, I think. So I think it's really important that you keep trying to steer that back. And I would also say this in terms of thesis meetings as well. I know we're really talking about mentorship, mentee meetings, but I've seen a lot of thesis meetings go wrong, where the people who are on the thesis committee will start steering this into a direction of controls, and then they go way off track, and it goes into an area where this isn't the publication that the student was hoping to go for. And so I think this is part of your training, is that you really need to figure out how to steer your boat and make it go in the direction you want to go. And so I mean that with your mentors, I mean it with your, the other mentors, because these mentors are also going to be people writing you letters, and you want to have a good impression with them, but you also want to make sure that you're going the direction you're excited to get up to do every morning. I hope that answers.
It does, absolutely. And in fact, it leads into I think a slightly related question that has come up from some of our course participants, which is, what do you do actually when your interests start to maybe diverge from the mentor's interests or the advisor's interests? Because obviously projects evolve, and people's interests evolve, and how does one deal with that and navigate those conversations, those research conversations, then with the between the mentor and the mentee? And actually, Jody, if you want to start there, I'd be interested, since you sort of led straight into that question.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I had that happen recently. I had a medical fellow in my lab who, so his training was interesting. It was very different to what I was doing, and actually it was getting into an area that I didn't know anything about. And I also said, at some point, I'm not going to talk about this when I give seminars anymore, because it's so way off. And so you have to think about that. So that's a point that is like, if I'm not going to talk about it in seminars, and you're a postdoc and you're trying to go off and get a job somewhere, and I'm not talking about your stuff, then that gets to be a problem. And so in his case, and you know, what he wanted to work on was fine. And basically, I just want people to do what they want to do, especially if they're in a postdoc position and they're trying to figure out what the next step is. And you have to really love what you're doing if you're going to build a whole lab on it. It doesn't make any sense to just clunk away doing extrusion or whatever I'm telling them to do. And so I said, maybe it's a good idea to go to this other lab where they really specialize in that. And so he moved down the hall to another lab, and I think he's a lot happier. It just fits more with what he wants to do. And, you know, it was an amicable like breakup. We still are good friends, but we just decided that he was going in a direction that was not going to get feedback from the lab and not much, you know, time in the limelight. So I think, you know, and I guess those are conversations that are good to have early on, because, you know, you can say, well, if you could just get this done, get a paper, then you can take this project as your postdoc on to do something different, and that's fine. And I don't even need to be a part of that paper, you know, the publication list. I don't need to be an author. So it kind of depends on where you are a little bit. But I think in this case, he was very early on, and it seemed he was just way off of any knowledge in our lab. So I think that was reasonable, and he seems a lot happier.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there other thoughts, Janet or Harlan, about sort of how to navigate that sometimes challenging position where the mentor and the mentee are sort of have different interests or heading sort of in different interest areas? Janet?
Yeah. So, you know, I think what I've been hearing, and I agree totally with, is the idea of putting all these conversations in a context. And I just think that I'm hearing about two different contexts. And there's the context of the research and the research agenda and direction of the group that you happen to be working with. And then there's also your own career. And so when I think about, you know, the conversations that you're going to have about the research and where it's going and what it is you're going to be doing next, I think about what is it about this research group and the funding that it has right now, the grants that it has, and how does my work fit into that? Because what we haven't talked about is how this work is being funded, right? So you can get really interested in doing something, and depending on where your funding is coming from, that might be a possibility for you, but it might not be if the work that you want to do actually doesn't have funding in the group that you're in. And I think that so we have to be honest about that piece. I think in terms of your own career and your professional development, I would encourage everybody to do an individual development plan with their mentor and to have that as part of and linked to the research plan that you have, because the IDP, or the individual development plan, incorporates more than just the research, but the research is there. And you can incorporate your research goals, which are naturally going to probably diverge from your mentor's goals at some point. I mean, they should. You'll move on and do some different things. And I think focusing on what you're doing in that research team that's contributing to that research team's outcomes right now, but then putting it in the context of your own career and how it's going to set you up and contribute to your next step. Like, what is my next step? Have I thought about that? Does my mentor know what I'm thinking? And it's not that I don't want to do this now, but I want to do this now in a way that will help me get to the next place. And so I think if you can engage your individual development plan and your research plan in a linked way with your mentor, that this helps you bring context to every conversation that you have. Big picture in terms of the research and big picture in terms of your whole career in your life. So most all mentors, as Jody just pointed out, have your best interests at heart. And sometimes that means moving to another group. And I think that that's fine, but you can do that more amicably if you're on the same page with regard to where you're at, where you're going, and what the resources are available to support the work that you're interested in doing. So
those are really good points. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move to another question? Okay, great. Thank you. I think it's so important to to recognize that there is that unfortunate piece of like, well, what is the funding and who funds you, and what does the lab do? And sometimes there are compromises that can be made so that there's a way forward, and sometimes it's finding a new home. But both can work. It's really sort of figuring out for yourself what's the right situation. So we have a question from a course student that is, I think, a very familiar feeling to a lot of people. It's certainly one I recognize from the time when I was in grad school. And the question is, sometimes when one is just starting up a new project, it can feel like all you have are stupid questions. And you feel like you don't know what you're doing. And you're very conscious of the fact that you sort of don't know what you don't know. And it can be very sort of inhibiting to have a conversation with someone. So how does one, when one is sort of feeling that like, wow, I just don't even know, I'm just starting, I'm just building, I really have no idea, but you also know that you're supposed to be having conversations with people about your research. How does one have these conversations? How does one get there? And Harland, maybe. Oh, Jody, you raised your hand. I'll shoot to Jody, and then I'll move on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I love this one because I am the queen of asking stupid questions. And I learned it from Martin Rath, who I think is fantastic, and I love him. And he writes the molecular biology of the cell textbook. So if he can ask stupid questions, you can ask stupid questions. and actually the time when I'm in the space where I'm asking stupid questions is the time I'm most excited about things, because you're in totally new space. And this should be the most exciting science get into, is when you're confused, but it's kind of, you could be on the eclipse of finding something totally new. And the questions that you're asking, some of the dumbest questions I've ever heard are the most fundamental questions, right? So I remember when I first started at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, I sat in this class, and this, student put up his hand. He said, okay, why do people die from metastasis? And he said, I know it's a dumb question. And nobody knew. I mean, this is an important question, right? Nobody knew. So this is like a whole field of, something that somebody's not working on. These are the things we want to encourage. So I would say you should almost have a competition when you go to a seminar, who can ask the dumbest question. This is the stuff that science is really made out of, because these are the big, and this is why I like to train. This is why I like to have middle school students come in, because they ask really dumb questions, and they are the most spot on, like fundamental questions. So if you're in that space, you're doing well. I give you big thumbs up.
You. That is such a great response, and very supportive. I'm wondering, Harland, do you have any comments on this?
No, I just love dumb questions too. I think, but how do we take advantage of those questions? And I think you should. I think one way we had to develop a strategy in our lab, and through lab meetings. So we give an opportunity beyond what they've done in their specific work, is to get on the board and just do a random schematic on the question you're asking and draw it out. Can you convey and communicate via figures? And we're talking about this cell, and one thinks it's this mechanism, and they'll go, well, here's my dumb question. And then I say, well, can you address this dumb question, or show us the boundaries where your question is coming from via chalk talk, and drawing it out on the board. So it gives the students some ease. It gives everyone understanding that science is a development of a series of questions, and there's always a start point. And the most dumbest question is usually the most fundamental start point of a series of fundamental questions that lead to the big picture and the coolest answers you have. So I think it's just about techniques too. No question is a dumb question, but have an opportunity to explore it with your mentors and with your peer mentees. And that might be a great mechanism to do so.
Such a good point.
Yeah, try to hash your dumb questions out a little bit.
That is such a good point. Janet, I was wondering if maybe you might comment a little bit on sort of the emotional aspect. So there's also sort of that inhibition, like even when you know that it's a good idea to have a conversation, are there suggestions, Janet or anyone else, on sort of how to actually do it, even, you know, like you logically know, but emotionally you're inhibited?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just to be honest with yourself and own it, that you want to impress this person who's your mentor. And so you're putting pressure on yourself to do this. And we all feel that way, right? It gets back to asking the dumb question, or I would say just any question. What you do is you make yourself vulnerable and you expose yourself to criticism. However, science is questions. I mean, that's what it is. The whole process is about asking and trying to figure out answers. So that's the most exciting thing. So when you're nervous about whether it's even asking a question, or you're just nervous about having a meeting because you feel like you need to know everything, you have to go in and you have to look professional. I would say try to ground yourself and think about, why should I know all of this? If I know all of this, why am I in a training program to learn all of this, right? So the expectation is that you're going to ask questions and that you don't know everything, and you shouldn't be expected to know everything, right? So the other thing that I encourage people, other than to just kind of reorient yourself and realize that you don't need to be perfect all the time and in front. And I think this is particularly hard for new graduate students who've done really well as undergraduates. And all of a sudden, this is a whole new ball game, right? We're not telling people what they told us. They're asking us questions that they don't know the answer to either, and we're trying to figure it out together. So it's a whole new space to be operating from. And I think if it helps you feel better, I often encourage students to look at the literature, because you can do some quick searches, these online search tools, it's fabulous. And even if you find one or two things that give you confidence, okay, I know a little something about this. I still don't know the answer to my question, but when I walk in, I can say, well, I kind of looked and I found a few things, but it doesn't make sense. Often this helps students feel a little more confident as they walk into a meeting. So it's not such a black box. So that's just a strategy you can use that I think is often helpful. But more than anything else, realize you're in a training position because you're there to learn. So it's okay to not know. Don't beat yourself up about it.
Such a good point. We're right at the hour, but I'm going to go a little bit, about 5 minutes more, because of our technical difficulties, we started late. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of questions. One question that I think certainly affects a portion of our trainees is how do you balance, like a number of trainees have multiple mentors, like they might have a co-PI situation, or they might have collaborators that are incredibly invested. How does one actually navigate and balance these discussions when you have these sort of, very important mentors who are both deeply invested in your project, but might have different interests and might be sort of going in different directions? So I was wondering if there might be some advice for people who sort of have these very excited and interested people, but are not necessarily going in the same direction, as maybe even the same direction as the trainee. And Harland, maybe we'll start with you.
I'll keep my response brief. I think it's a matter of getting all of the investors at the table. And really, if once the team gets that large, or even just with a couple of three, it's good to communicate as a group, and then everyone can understand where each other's coming from. Obviously, the primary mentor is your primary source of information to to receive and deliver in terms of what you think your project is headed. But at some point, if you feel that there is some kind of indecision on who do you think you should listen to, or some primary conflict, I think it has to do with meeting as a group and understanding what everybody is thinking about at the table around your research.
That's absolutely true. Everyone sort of needs to find the same page. And any other thoughts from Janet or Jody on just navigating this multi-PI? Jody.
So one of the things I think is important that I've learned over the years, and actually I think it's important that mentees understand that mentorship does not come as a natural for us. So it's not like, oh, we're scientists, we're good geeks at the bench, and then all of a sudden we just got into this managerial role, with the tie, and we're learning too. So we can always benefit from your feedback on what to do better. So I think this is important that you know this. But one of the important things I learned over time was to set expectations. And I think it's good to do at the beginning. So I think, come to the table, but I think also at the very beginning of this collaboration between the two labs, because people are wanting to collaborate all the time. There's grants that are pushing us to do this kind of thing. So this is happening more and more. But it's good to come to the table and say, okay, where is the student going to be based? Because that's going to have a big effect on their, the way that they think about the project, I think more. And what are the expectations? If you're working towards a paper, things don't always go the direction you want to, if you're going into space that is unknown, which is what you should be doing. So how do you navigate that? Then come to the table. And then I think you need to have the open discussion and just sort of end with what we want to accomplish and make sure everybody's on board. And again, use your voice, because sometimes you'll get railroaded and it may not be something you want to do. And at the end of the day, as a mentor, what I don't want is somebody feeling like, oh, I don't want to work on this project anymore. There's so many things to do in science, right? There should never be that thing. You should always be excited to come in and do what you want to do. So make sure that piece is there for you, because it's your project. This is what's different about being an undergraduate to a scientist. We're grooming you to be scientists, and you have to own your project. You have to love your project, and you have to steer it. And it can feel hard to do, but at the end of the day, you're going to be happier. You're going to just feel more productive, and it's going to be yours, and you'll feel like, yes, I did it.
Such great advice. So I'm going to end with, I think, a question everyone probably needs help with, because science doesn't always work how it's supposed to work. Things don't always go well. So how does one have a conversation with their mentor when their science is not going well? Because we're all of us at some point had to have this, or will have to have this conversation with their mentor, and it can be hard. So maybe we should finish on like, how do we have that conversation be productive? And Janet, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think you have that conversation honestly. That's the most important thing. And be honest with yourself. Is it about why it might not be going well? Are you not motivated? I think Jody's right on. Like, you have to love the care and feeding of your project is really important. And if it turns out you're not that motivated, that might be why. So I think being honest about what it is that's not working, or is it, there could just be something in the technique but you really just need to go in with the attitude, we're going to figure out what's going on here. And not make any assumptions about what the cause is, but be very open about what role you might be playing in why it might not be working.
That's such good advice. Any last thoughts on that topic from Harland or Jody? Okay, I think we've nailed it. Hopefully we've given some good advice on how to navigate some of these conversations. And there's another live Q&A that is related to this topic that you can watch with how to discuss your research plan with a mentor that features Cynthia Furman and Rick McGee. That's also on our iBiology YouTube channel and our website. Thank you for everyone who watched our live Q&A or will be watching it later. And thank you so much, Jody, Janet, and Harland. It's just so wonderful to be able to have people out there who are being good mentors and training good mentors and thinking about these issues, be able to share their wisdom with us. For anyone who's more interested in iBiology, please know that we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and you can sign up for our newsletter on our webpage, iBiology.org. And if you're interested at all in the Planning Your Scientific Journey course, we will be having it again in 2018 in the new year. So look forward to those. So thank you to everyone, and thank you especially for bearing with the technical difficulties and staying an extra few minutes. We all really appreciate it. Take care. Bye.